Don't you worry, the clip's about to begin, but don't forget to subscribe. Or else, don't make me turn this website around.
We'll move on. We've got Sean in Utah. Sean, you are on the line. How can we help you today?
Hi.
Yeah, hi. How are you doing?
Hi.
Good, thanks.
Good.
What's your question today?
Yes, so my topic is, I've got two questions, but the topic is gender abolitionism. One, wanted to get your thoughts on gender abolitionism and how it impacts the trans community. And two, how I can have better conversations with trans people and not come off like a dick.
Both
Pro
good
tip,
questions.
don't be a dick. No, okay, yeah, cool. Do you want to go first or second, Arden, on the first one?
I can kick us off a little bit. I mean,
Okay.
I don't have particularly a strong position for or against gender abolitionism. So I have mixed feelings here, right? Because I understand that a gender abolitionist is not saying that we're going to abolish the category of woman, or that that you can't identify yourself as a woman or express yourself in a highly feminine way. However, I feel that I have grown up and my brain and personality were formed in a culture in which the gender binary did exist, and that's how I identify myself. So the notion of this whole thing can be a little apprehensive to me. But on the other hand, I also think that this sounds like, from the talks that I've heard around this, I think it does sound like it is probably a good thing because it doesn't necessarily impact how I identify or how I present myself. If it is better for the trans community as a whole, I'm definitely not opposed to it or anything like that. I kind of abstain from taking a strong position on the matter.
Okay, wicked. Well, I'll go in hard then. So I think that when we talk about gender abolitionism, or when we're basically discussing anything in a kind of radical feminist view, we need to say what we actually mean by gender. And often we use gender to mean so many different things. Sometimes when we say gender, we're talking about your internal sense of which box you best fit into out of male or female or non-binary or whatever. And sometimes we're talking about gender roles, like the woman stays at home in the kitchen and the man goes out and fights on the battlefield. And sometimes we're talking about gender presentation, like women wear makeup and dresses and men don't even wipe their own ass, or whatever the thing of trending on Twitter at the moment is. And there is a lot of different things here. And I think that it's important to just be able to separate these things. So when we say, so if we're talking about gender roles, women should stay at home in the kitchen, men should go out and work. That is just bullshit. If that's enforced on people, it's bullshit. We shouldn't be enforcing these restrictive roles and rules upon people to force them to do stuff they don't want to do just for societal cohesion or whatever the argument is. So I'm totally up for wiping that out completely. However, it's important to then say that doesn't mean that a woman couldn't stay at home and look after the kids and a man couldn't be the one providing. What the important thing is to be saying that this cannot be pressured upon people, and it has to be a free choice. And, obviously someone has to raise the children and someone has to earn the money. And maybe that's split between both partners, or maybe that's just given to one or the other. So when it comes to these traditional gender roles, I think that abolishing the pressure for people to conform to them is a good thing. I think that can only be beneficial. I think a lot of sexism is built upon this. Women aren't good at jobs. Women aren't good at maths. All this kind of stuff is sexism, which is based on this meaning of gender. And it's the same with presentation. So if you want to wear makeup or a dress, whatever, that's cool. But the idea that women have to perform some gender in a certain way in order to get respect or in order to be considered worthwhile in society is obviously bullshit. And the fact that men often aren't even allowed to is equally bullshit. And there's all these strong rules. And again, we should destroy the pressure to do these things. Though this then becomes a little bit more complicated when we're talking about the beauty industry, which creates, like, if we say, oh, well, everyone's just free to make their own choice, then that's kind of idealized, but we're also ignoring the fact that when people are free to make their own choices, there can still be this kind of implicit pressure. Even if you're not saying to someone, if you don't walk up to a child and say, you're a girl, you have to wear makeup, you could still present loads of adverts of women wearing makeup who look perfect. And it creates this pressure for people to follow these things, and it can kind of implicitly make these like enforced, gendered, very structured things that people feel like they have to meet up to. So I think we do need to actively combat that, because that shouldn't involve banning people from wearing makeup, because that's ridiculous. Makeup is an art as much as anything else. But what it could do is address how some advertising is predatory and confront how the makeup and beauty industry operates. So there is a whole discussion there. But anyway, when we're talking about these parts of gender, I think it's very important to say we aren't talking about what a trans person is. It's just a fact that people are born trans, or at least being trans is a largely nature thing, which develops at some point in your life quite early on. And you're either trans or cis, and that's very unlikely to go away. And there possibly is a nurture component, because there's a nurture component to everything, but it's largely nature. And in a world where we destroyed gender stereotypes, and we destroyed gender presentation, and we destroyed gender roles and everything, trans people would still be being born. And that might not mean the same things. Trans women might not feel the need to perform femininity to be taken seriously. Trans men might not feel like they need to perform masculinity to be taken seriously, because there is a lot of pressure on trans people to do that. But there would still be some need for medical transition and, other forms of transition that weren't related to these like stereotypes and roles and all of this bullshit which we pressure upon people. Like in a like post-gender world, there would still be trans people. There would probably still be the art of makeup. There would still be people looking after the children at home. But the important thing is all of this stuff wouldn't be pressured upon people. And I think that often when people talk about this, especially when they're coming in from like the like maybe the second wave feminist, kind of radical feminist angle, and they're basically, and if they're a TERF, they might think that abolishing gender will get rid of trans people, because trans people are just people reacting to sexism. They're just, oh, it's a feminine man who doesn't think he can be a real man, so he thinks he has to be a woman, or it's a masculine woman, or just any woman who hates the pressures upon women, so she has to be a man to escape it. And that's just not true. That just isn't what a trans person is. And that's just important to make that distinction. So that's why I've really laboured that point, because I feel like, particularly in the UK, this is one of the large drivers of the gender critical movement. And it's just important to recognise the difference between these things, because, gender, as in roles, is oppressive. If you're a woman and you grow up and your whole family expects you to have children and quit your career, like that, it's pressure, it's bullshit, like it can fuck off. Anyway, that was a little bit of a rant. Did that help your first question?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely just wanted to know kind of where you stood on it, and, definitely just listening is awesome. I guess my main problem, it's helpful to hear what you have to say about it, because I often hear, you get in those Facebook wars about maybe the right-wing person saying something about like, oh, there's only 2 genders, and then the left is like, oh, no, there's lots of genders, and I'm like, I think gender's bullshit. Like, I don't know how to engage in these conversations without trying to piss off people that I would normally just try to be an ally for, I mean, trans community people are people, like, I don't feel the need to put people into boxes, and I don't want it to feel like an attack on the trans community to say, oh, you want to use these pronouns, well, I think those pronouns are bullshit, I don't want to attack someone, but I also want to just, get involved in conversations.
So I think there's a very common meme which people say, which is gender and sex are different. And that is true, but I think sometimes it's confusing. And now this is a whole topic, and I promise I won't go on a huge rant about it, but when someone says these two things are different, that often suggests that they are like totally orthogonal. They have no relation on each other. They're independent variables. And that's not necessarily the case. Certainly gender roles are forced upon mainly cis women. And I mean, they're forced upon everyone. Anyway, this is a complicated topic. But where I was going with this is there are some forms of oppression which are going to exist. If we got rid of right, let me start again, take a different angle. There are some difficulties that some people are going to face in like our post-gender world. So even if we say we've eradicated this idea that women have to stay at home with the children, and we've eradicated this idea that women have to wear makeup, it's still just a fact that a lot of cis women and trans men and non-binary people are going to face, reproductive issues like with menstrual cycles and the ability to get pregnant, and some other people aren't going to face that, and that is a difference. And if all we did was get rid of gender stereotypes, we would still have to address that difference between people. So when we come to talking about all of these issues, it's like it can be very easy for people to just say, oh, we'll just split these into two clearly different boxes, and this just applies to people with who are born this way, and this just applies to people with born this way. And then it can kind of end up with a situation where people are ignoring how things like misogyny and misandry actually work, because you say like, oh, well, we're only talking about people who face menstrual issues and like attacks on their reproductive freedom. So, and we're ignoring gender. So what that means is we're just talking about people who are born female. And that kind of hides the fact of how today misogyny works, and how misogyny will unfortunately always work, is that trans women do face misogyny. And like if we try and construct a worldview where we're just kind of cast off lots of these things, or say, oh well, we're going to get rid of it all anyway, so it doesn't matter, it can just really ignore these real world huge influences on people's lives, and it kind of messes up our analysis of anything. So I think when you see these people arguing, quite common, you'll get someone saying like, the only important thing is your birth sex, and someone else will say your only important thing is your gender identity. And really, I guess this is maybe slightly controversial for both sides to hear, but like when a misogynistic dickhead shouts something at you in the street, they can't see your original birth certificate and they can't see your gender identity. So there are much more complicated factors at play here. And so when someone is saying like, oh, well, we should only be creating spaces for this type of person or whatever, it's just very complicated. And people like to draw these like nice little easy boxes. And I know that sometimes I've seen gender abolitionists come in with this idea of like, oh, we'll just get rid of gender, and then all we need to do is have, address this systematic problem against people with wombs and problem solved. And it isn't that simple. And also that's going to be offensive on top of the fact that it's not a very good model of the world. And then when it comes to pronouns, just because you mentioned it, and I'm sorry, I'm ranting again, but like pronouns are socially constructed. There are some languages like Finnish, which just don't have gendered pronouns. And there are some languages where they gender absolutely everything, like French. And it is potentially bullshit, and it potentially contributes to sexism. If you have this idea of like cats are female because they're like sleek and sneaky and soft, and dogs are male because they're angry and stupid or whatever, that it can contribute to this idea of men and women, and it kind of affects everyone. And that is going to be a whole huge problem with languages which gender things. But like English is in this unique position where it does gender people in a few things, but not most things. It's tricky, but I think it's worth noting that, people in our current world, we haven't abolished gender. And some, if you're arguing with some theorist or some feminist or some knobhead like me who was totally going all in on this and discuss it with you, we can say that, well, pronouns are part of the gender construct and we don't really want the gender construct, and so they're kind of unimportant at best. But at the same time, when you're talking to some 15-year-old kid and they're a trans kid and they're struggling to fit in with all of their peers and they just want to be like everyone else, and you're like, actually, pronouns are bullshit, so I'm going to ignore what you say. It's like just demonstrably will make their life worse. So it's important to know when to come in with these conversations about, gender, and also not focus on trans people. Like, the most of the people in the world who love gender stereotypes, most of the people in the world who will get in a huge fuss if you call them the wrong pronoun are cis people. Like, cis people are the ones doing the gender most of the time. 99% of the people who are forcing gender stereotypes and all this gender stuff, it's a cis person thing. So it often ends up getting focused around trans people because we're the ones causing the most mess with the current system. But it's, if we're saying in general, one day we can get rid of the idea that pronouns are gendered, then that's an okay comment to make, I guess. If you're saying, well, trans people can fuck off because pronouns are bullshit, it's like, no, that's kind of a crap take. Anyway, so I've ranted too much. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, just to kind of follow up with that. Yeah, I have no problem arguing with a cis person on gender stuff because, like you just said, normally the problems with that stuff come from cis people. It's just that when I engage in these conversations and I'm trying to like mediate or come in with a third opinion, I just don't want to say the wrong thing and like deny a trans person's identity basically by saying, oh, it's all bullshit. So that's kind of what I was looking for, and I think you answered it.
Yeah, I think it's worth splitting it up and just being super explicit, because you can, if someone's talking, if like you see some argument and you want to do like a but actually, you want to be the reply guy, then you can come in and you could just say, actually, pronouns are bullshit. And that will just come across as an attack on trans people. Or you could say, well, I think it's actually very important to recognize the difference between someone's identity and their person and the gender dysphoria that they are just demonstrably facing and is completely disconnected from whether society is sexist or not. Like, that's all real and that's important stuff to discuss. But also, pronouns are part of language, and language is socially constructed, and maybe gendered constructs in language contribute to the patriarchy or something like that. And that's a lot more of a tedious thing to write. And I understand why you might not come in with that, but it's just important to know as well that like the political optics of coming in with some opinion about pronouns today will probably look to everyone like you're just coming in with a Ben Shapiro take, and you just kind of just want to make it clear that you're not, because Right. But yeah, I hope that's helped.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm really sorry, Arden, for ranting.
No, you're good.
This is like something I have such strong opinions on.
Oh, right.
We've got this little like radical feminist group chat that we argue about all this stuff all the time, and I've got spicy views.
No, that's good. I didn't want to speak too much on it because I think a lot of what you said was great. I'm totally for abolishing like gender roles and things like that. Sometimes just by the title alone, gender abolitionism on its face seems like there's maybe some premises that are lying underneath there that I'm not necessarily aware of. So I was like, I don't feel comfortable taking a position if I'm not fully aware of what this construct is.
Whenever this like thing comes up, I always come in first with, just to be clear, we both accept the fact that trans people won't go away if we destroy sexism. And sometimes they'll say, oh, well, of course. And sometimes they'll be like, no. And you're like, oh, so this is about trans people. Well, in that case, I disagree with everything you're about to say.
Hey, thanks for checking out this clip for The Line. While you're here, hit that like button, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and then share this with that bitter uncle of yours who loves talking about the good old days.